"You're unbelievable, Lena. You just had to mess everything up." Emily's voice sliced through the gentle backdrop of the waves outside, sharp and unforgiving. Her fork clattered against her plate, the sound ricocheting off the walls of the quiet dining room. She glared at me, arms crossed, her whole body radiating accusation. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Around the table, conversations died out. You could feel the tension, thick and heavy, settling over us like a blanket that suffocates rather than comforts. My dad let out one of his long, weary sighs, the kind that seemed to empty him out a little more every time. His shoulders slumped, as if he was already tired of the fight before it even began. My mom pressed her lips into that tight, pale line she always used. Her attempt at neutrality, but everyone at the table knew what it really meant. She was already picking sides, and it was never mine. I stared down at my plate, the shrimp scampi cooling by the second, its buttery scent now almost nauseating. The food looked back at me, an accusation in itself. I barely tasted it. My appetite drowned under the familiar crushing weight of judgment, as if I could physically feel their eyes pressing on my shoulders, making me smaller. "My name's Lena Harper. I'm 35 years old, but sometimes, sitting at this table, I feel like I'm 13 again, lost in the middle of a family drama I never signed up for. I don't remember when I first became the scapegoat. Maybe it happened so early that I just absorbed it as part of who I am. If something goes wrong, the first question is always, what did Lena do? Dinner's late. Lena's fault. The weather turns bad. Somehow, my responsibility. If Emily trips over her own feet, I must have pushed her. At least, that's how the story gets rewritten in my mother's retellings. Over time I learned to expect it. It's like there's a script, and I'm always cast as the villain. Emily, meanwhile, steps away from every disaster with applause, the misunderstood hero. She's got this magnetic charm, funny and quick, always able to twist the spotlight so she looks like the victim, no matter who actually caused the mess. Mom calls it endearing, as if it's some adorable quirk. To me, it's exhausting, like running a race where the finish line keeps moving farther away every year. But you get used to it. Or at least you learn to live with it, the way you live with a stone in your shoe. I should have seen tonight coming. Emily thrives on these moments. She knows just how to wind me up, how to turn the smallest mishap into undeniable proof that I'm the family screw-up. Still, some stubborn, naive part of me keeps hoping things will be different. Maybe this time I think we'll just have a nice meal. Maybe I won't be the target. But here we are. The whole mess started 2 days ago, when we checked in at the beach resort. The plan was for a real family vacation, a reset after years of half-hearted holidays and missed birthdays. Me, Emily, and our parents together for once, away from the chaos of work and obligations. I wanted it to go right, so I took charge of the planning. I spent weeks researching resorts, combing through online reviews, comparing amenities. I made the bookings, confirmed the details, and tried to anticipate every possible hiccup. I wanted it to be perfect, not just for me but for all of us. Maybe I hoped that if I got everything right, they'd see me differently. Maybe I'd finally earn a little grace. But the universe, or maybe just our luck, had other plans. Our first night we showed up at the resort's fancy seafood restaurant, dressed up and a little sunburned, only to be told there was no reservation. My stomach dropped. I could feel my mom's gaze on me before she even spoke. "Lena, I thought you said you handled this." The disappointment in her voice was sharper than any knife. My hands shook as I fumbled with my phone, scrolling frantically for the confirmation email. "I did. Look, here it is. I booked it weeks ago." She just stared, her expression blank but her eyes hard. Emily swooped in, voice dripping with that practiced sarcasm. "Then why are we standing here with nowhere to eat?" "Great job, Lena." The hostess apologized, but the place was packed. No reservation, no table. So, instead of oysters and candlelight, we found ourselves at a burger joint down the road, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, ketchup bottles sticky with fingerprints. Emily made a show of her disappointment, sighing loudly, shooting me looks, muttering under her breath just loud enough for Mom to hear. This is why I hate letting anyone else handle things. It felt like she was auditioning for an audience, and I was the only one who didn't get the script. The next morning didn't offer any relief. Emily had arranged a snorkeling trip, her single contribution to the entire vacation, but one she made sure everyone knew about. We showed up at the dock, only to be met by the guide, apologetic and stressed. The boat was delayed by mechanical problems. Not my fault, not even my responsibility, but the blame still found its way to me. Emily gave me that look, the one that says everything without a word, then muttered, "Another flawless Lena plan." I wanted to protest. This wasn't my event, wasn't my mistake, but I bit my tongue. After years of being cast as the scapegoat, you learn to swallow your protests. It's not worth the eruption. Better to let her vent, to let the storm pass and hope it moves on quickly. But it didn't. The little digs continued all day, each one sharper than the last. Emily's words were like mosquito bites. Small but persistent, impossible to ignore. She had a knack for slipping in jabs where no one else noticed, except me. My parents, as always, seemed to exist in some parallel universe, refusing to intervene. Mom even laughed at one of Emily's snipes, as if it were all just harmless fun. "You two really need to work on your teamwork," she said, shaking her head with a smile. Teamwork, as if this was a partnership, not an endless series of trials for me to fail. I blinked back tears, determined not to let anyone see how much it hurt. I told myself not to let it get to me, that I was too old for this, that I could rise above it. But the sting lingered. Now here we are, second night at the resort, back at another restaurant. The sunset outside is stunning, but inside, the air is thick with accusation. Emily sits up straight, her voice getting louder, ticking off every mishap as if she's presenting evidence in a trial. "First, we miss our dinner because Lena can't even manage to click confirm," she says, holding up a finger. "Then the snorkeling trip is a disaster because, what, you forgot to check the weather." She's relentless, and I can feel every eye at the table on me. The narrative has already been written, and I'm the punchline. Something inside me breaks. I've let this slide for years, telling myself it wasn't worth the chaos to stand up for myself. But tonight I can't let it go, not again. My hands are shaking, but I manage to speak. "That's enough, Emily." My voice is quiet, but the words hang in the air, heavier than I expected. Dad looks at me surprised but says nothing. Mom's gaze sharpens, waiting for me to apologize, as if I'm the one who's ruined everything. Emily just grins, basking in the attention. "Oh, come on. Don't get defensive, Lena. I'm just pointing out the facts. Someone has to." I feel the tablecloth bunched in my fists, my knuckles white. My face burns, not just with anger, but with years of humiliation and frustration. I want to tell them everything. How it feels to always be the one blamed, to carry the weight of everyone's disappointment, to have your best efforts twisted into failures. But the words catch in my throat. I've been silencing myself for so long, I'm not sure how to speak up anymore. As the meal drags on, Emily's words linger, echoing in my mind. Dad leans back in his chair, looking older than he did at the start of dinner. The silence stretches between us, full of things unsaid. I wonder if anyone else feels it, the way these patterns repeat, the way no one ever asks what I need, what I want. Part of me aches for someone to stand up for me, to break the cycle. But deep down I know it has to start with me. Maybe this time I'll find the courage to rewrite my role in this family story. Maybe I'll stop waiting for their approval and start living for myself. But for now, I sit at the table, the waves crashing outside, and try to find my breath again. My dad pressed his fingers into his temples, his whole posture tight and coiled, like just being in this place was giving him a migraine that burrowed deeper every minute. He glanced at the laminated menu, but I could tell he wasn't reading a word. On the other side of the table, my mom sat stiffly, eyes fixed on the check in her hand as if it contained the secrets of the universe. She wouldn't look at me, not even once, like if she pretended I didn't exist. She wouldn't have to admit what was happening or, worse, choose who to back up. The three of us were locked in this weird, silent standoff, with tension as thick as the humidity outside. Finally, my mom's shoulders slumped and she let out a breath that seemed to deflate her whole body. "I don't get why this has to be so complicated," she said, her voice tired. "Tired of this vacation, tired of us, maybe just tired of trying. Lena, you know how important these trips are for our family. Why didn't you double-check everything?" The accusation in her voice stung more than I expected. I could feel heat rising to my cheeks. "I did." The words shot out of me way sharper than I meant, but I couldn't stop them. The whole restaurant seemed to freeze, every head turning toward us for a split second. "I checked everything twice. The dinner, the snorkeling, all of it. I don't know what went wrong, but it wasn't because I didn't try." Emily, never one for subtlety, let out this huge theatrical sigh that practically echoed off the walls. She shoved her chair back so hard it scraped against the tile. "Well, clearly it wasn't enough," she announced, her voice loud enough that a couple at the next table glanced over. "I'm going for a walk. Maybe someone else can figure out how to salvage what's left of this trip." No one tried to stop her as she stormed out, leaving us in the wreckage of her anger. The silence she left behind was almost worse than her words, heavy and suffocating. My dad glanced helplessly at my mom, who just shook her head with this tiny resigned motion. No words, just a silent plea not to start another argument. Later, lying in my hotel bed, I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the paint with my eyes as if they could distract me from the storm in my head. Emily's words wouldn't leave me alone. "You just had to mess everything up. This is why we can't rely on you." It wasn't just what she said that hurt, but how my parents let it hang in the air, unchallenged, as if it were just a fact about me. Something they'd always known, just waiting for another chance to say out loud. My mom's polite concern felt like a mask she wore to avoid conflict, while my dad's silence was even worse. Like he'd already made up his mind, and I wasn't worth defending. It wasn't the first time Emily had twisted things, so I looked like the villain, and deep down I knew it wouldn't be the last. She had this way of rewriting history, and my parents always read the version she handed them. I picked up my phone, thumb hovering over Lisa's contact. She's always been the one person in my life who makes me feel seen, who reminds me I'm not as small or invisible as my family makes me feel. But it was almost midnight, and I couldn't bring myself to send her another late-night panic-fueled message. Instead, I scrolled through my apps, not really seeing anything, just trying to keep my mind from spinning out. Then, by chance, I found myself staring at a message thread from Emily, dated 2 weeks ago. "Hey Lena, can you check the snorkeling thing for me? I'm slammed at work and might have messed something up. Actually, I think I accidentally canceled the dinner reservation too. Can you fix it?" My heart thudded in my chest. My fingers trembled as I scrolled further back, reading every message with new eyes. It was all there. Emily's rushed requests, her confessions that she'd messed up the bookings and needed me to clean up her messes. The evidence was so clear it made my stomach twist. I'd been so busy trying to keep everything together that I'd forgotten these messages even existed. Now, rereading them, I realized Emily hadn't just made a mistake. She'd let me take the fall for it, and my parents had let her. The next morning, I barely touched my breakfast. My mom kept up this relentless, brittle cheerfulness, talking about the weather or the beach as if she could force us all to be happy just by refusing to acknowledge the tension. Emily sat at the end of the table, scrolling through her phone, her face unreadable, like nothing that happened last night mattered. My dad sipped his coffee and stared out the window, retreating into himself. I watched him, silently willing him to say something, anything to break the cycle, but he stayed silent. As soon as I could, I slipped away, telling them I needed some air. I wandered down to the beach, the sand hot beneath my feet, the ocean breeze tangling my hair. I pulled out my phone and texted Lisa. "You up for a quick call?" She picked up almost instantly, her voice warm, grounding me. "What's up?" she asked, and just hearing her sounded like relief. "Not great," I admitted, my voice trembling. "Emily's at it again. She blamed me for ruining everything and my parents just went along with it. Like always." Lisa groaned, the sound full of sympathy and frustration. "Oh, for crying out loud. What happened this time?" I told her everything. How I tried to keep the plans together, how Emily had turned the story around, how my parents had let her. By the time I finished, I felt exhausted, like I'd run a marathon just getting the words out. And you're just letting her get away with it. Lisa's voice was sharper now, the edge of exasperation clear. Lena, you can't keep doing this. You have to stand up for yourself. I kicked at the sand, watching the grains scatter. What's the point? I muttered. Even if I say something, they'll just take her side. They always do. Lisa didn't miss a beat. Not if you have proof, she said, her tone fierce. Do you? For a second, I hesitated, the memory of those messages flashing in my mind. Actually, I might. I read them to her, every word, my voice shaky but growing steadier. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she let out a long, low whistle. Lena, that's a smoking gun. You have to show them. Don't let her get away with this. She needs to be called out. I don't know, I said, my voice small. It feels petty. What if it just makes things worse? What if they still take her side? And now I look like I'm stirring up trouble. Lisa softened. Worse than what? Letting Emily walk all over you while your parents watch. You deserve better than this, Lena. You deserve to have your side heard. You've spent your whole life taking the blame for things that aren't your fault. Don't you think it's time to change that? Her words lingered in my mind, echoing louder with every minute. She was right, and I knew it. Still, the idea of confronting my family, of actually showing them the proof, made my stomach knot. What if they didn't believe me, or cared so little that it didn't even matter? I spent the rest of the day moving through the motions, letting my parents drag me to the boardwalk, watching my dad pretend to be interested in souvenir shops just so he didn't have to be in the hotel room with us. My mom forced a smile, talking about taffy and sun hats as if nothing had happened. Emily trailed along behind us, headphones in, eyes glued to her phone, completely disengaged. I laughed at the right moments, nodded when I was supposed to, but inside I was replaying Lisa's words over and over. That night, as I lay in bed, I pulled up the screenshots of Emily's messages and stared at them, my heart pounding. Maybe this was my chance to finally stop being invisible. Maybe it was time to stop carrying the weight of everyone else's mistakes. Maybe, just this once, I could stand up for myself and force them to see me. Not as the scapegoat, not as the one who always messes up, but as someone who mattered. The thought was terrifying. But it also felt a little bit like hope. Their presence was a strange contradiction, soothing and menacing at once, like being wrapped in a blanket that might smother you. By the time dinner rolled around, I'd made a decision I couldn't take back. I couldn't keep letting Emily twist the narrative, turning me into the villain of her story while she played the misunderstood hero. If she wanted to paint me as the problem, let her do it in the full glare of the truth, not in the shadows of whispered insinuations and half-told tales. The restaurant itself was almost unreal in its beauty. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the ocean, waves glinting gold beneath the setting sun. The tables were gilded with that honeyed light, everything softened and glowing, as if we'd stepped into a scene from a movie where nothing bad could ever happen. A delicate melody floated through the air, blending with the gentle collision of silverware, the low buzz of laughter and conversation, all of it combining into a kind of symphony that should have been relaxing. But at our table, the tension was palpable, a thick fog that settled over our plates and glasses. Every word spoken seemed to echo louder than it should, every silence stretched just a bit too long. I sat there, picking at my salmon, unable to swallow more than a bite or two. My mom tried to fill the emptiness with an endless stream of bright, brittle comments about the pools, the spa, the view, as if her words could patch over the cracks in our family. My dad, usually the rock, seemed distant. His attention fixed more on the swirl of wine in his glass than the people sitting around him. I could see the lines of exhaustion etched deeper into his face with every passing moment. Emily, of course, was in her element. She held court effortlessly, weaving stories about her job and her friends, dropping names and little jokes that made my parents laugh and shake their heads, like the chaos of the last 48 hours was just a footnote, not the main event. Maybe they chose to ignore it, or maybe denial had become a reflex. an easier path than confronting what simmered beneath the surface. I watched the way they looked at her, the way they let her set the tone, and wondered how long I'd been invisible in my own family. Then dessert arrived, shining with sugar and promise, and Emily finally turned her gaze on me. Her smile had an edge to it, a knowingness that made my skin crawl. "So, Lena, what's your plan for ruining tomorrow's itinerary? Or are we just winging it from now on?" The words dropped like a stone into the center of the table, and my fork slipped from my hand, clattering against the porcelain. Heads turned curious, but I didn't care. I could feel the flush in my cheeks, anger rising swift and hot, demanding to be heard. "That's enough, Emily," I said, my voice low but steady, slicing through the carefully constructed facade. She gave a small, dismissive laugh, cocking her head as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Oh, lighten up. It's just a joke." "No, it isn't." My hands trembled as I pushed my plate away. "You've blamed me for everything that's gone wrong this week, and I'm done pretending it's not happening." For a moment no one moved. My mom's hand hovered above her glass, her face frozen in shock. My dad's eyes darted between us, worry creasing his brow. Emily leaned back, arms folded, a smirk still tugging at her lips, but I could see something flicker behind her eyes. "Here we go," she sighed, rolling her eyes. "Lena's got to play the victim again." I steadied myself, drawing a deep breath. I'd rehearsed this confrontation 100 times in my head, but the reality was harder than I imagined. "I'm not playing the victim. I'm telling the truth. Since you seem to have trouble with that, let's lay it all out." I took out my phone, my pulse hammering in my ears, and scrolled to the texts I'd saved, just in case, though I'd never really believed I'd use them. I placed the phone on the table, screen up, daring her to deny it. "Do you recognize these, Emily?" My voice was sharper than I intended. "You sent these to me 2 weeks ago. You remember, don't you?" She reached for the phone, her smile slipping just for a second, then quickly recovering. "What are you trying to say?" My mom leaned forward, her confusion etched deep. "What is all this?" "It's the truth," I said, finally finding my footing. "Emily cancelled the dinner reservation. She admitted it right here." I scrolled up, revealing more damning messages. "And the snorkeling trip. That wasn't my mistake. She asked me to fix it after she messed it up herself, and when I couldn't, she blamed me." My dad picked up the phone, his jaw tightening as he read. I watched the realization dawn in his eyes, slow but undeniable. "Emily," he said, his voice grave, "is this true?" Emily's cheeks flushed, her composure slipping. For a heartbeat she looked exposed, vulnerable, before she slid back into her practiced innocence, a performance she'd perfected over years. "Dad, really? You know how texts can get taken out of context. I was just venting. It's all a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I shot back, my voice rising despite myself. "You've spent the whole week making me out as incompetent, making me feel like everything's my fault. Now you want to call it a misunderstanding. Girls," my mom broke in, her voice shaky, "let's not do this here. We're in public, this isn't the time." "It's not a fight," I said, locking eyes with Emily. "It's about the truth. I'm not going to let her rewrite what happened just so she can feel better about herself." Emily's bravado faltered as she looked toward my dad, searching for an ally. Her voice softened, almost pleading. "I didn't mean to make things worse. I was just stressed, okay? Maybe I said things I shouldn't have, but that doesn't mean I don't care about this trip, or about us." My dad set the phone down, his expression unreadable for a moment. He glanced at me, then at Emily, then finally at my mom, as if weighing the years of family history against the evidence in front of him. "Beth," he said quietly, "I think we've been blind. We've let this happen." My mom frowned, her confusion deepening. "What do you mean?" He sighed, and there was a heaviness in his voice I'd never heard before. "I mean, Lena's been carrying the blame for things she didn't do, not just this week but for years. We let it go because it was easier than facing what's really going on. Silence settled over the table, more profound than any argument. In the background, a waiter cleared a nearby table, the sound of dishes clinking in glasses stacking the only sign that the world was still turning outside our little storm. My mom opened her mouth, then closed it again, her eyes darting between me and Emily, searching for something she wasn't ready to see. "Lena," she said eventually, her voice barely above a whisper, "why didn't you tell us sooner?" I let out a brittle laugh, the sound sharp and hollow. Would it have mattered? Every time I tried to stand up for myself, you brushed it aside or took Emily's side. Why would this time be any different? My words hovered in the air, heavier than anything I'd ever said. For the first time, I saw something shift in my mom's face, a crack in the certainty that had always kept her from seeing me. I realized then that the truth, once spoken, could never be unsaid. It didn't matter if it made things messier, or if it ruined the vacation. It was finally out, raw and undeniable, and maybe that was the only way anything would ever change. Regret, maybe even guilt. I watched it flicker across her face as she reached across the table, her hand hesitating before resting lightly on mine. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt almost fragile against the weight of all the years I'd spent frustrated, overlooked, and carrying silent disappointments. Yet, to my surprise, those two simple words hit me harder than I ever could have anticipated, burrowing into a part of me I'd tried to keep sealed. Emily shifted in her seat, her discomfort almost palpable. She wouldn't quite meet my gaze, her eyes instead darting between our parents and me as if searching for a safe place to land. "Look, I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "I guess I messed up, okay? I'm sorry, Lena." I looked at her, trying to read her. Was this a real apology or just another attempt to sidestep responsibility, to smooth things over like always? But as the silence stretched between us, I realized I didn't want to waste energy dissecting her motives anymore. For once, I didn't care if her apology was perfect or incomplete. I'd stopped chasing her approval a while back. What mattered was that the truth was finally exposed. No longer just my private burden but something everyone at the table could see. The walk back to our hotel was thick with silence, the kind that felt almost solid. The air was heavy with everything that had been said, and everything that still lingered unsaid, hovering just out of reach. The distant crash of ocean waves was the only sound, filling the gaps in conversation none of us seemed able to bridge. My family drifted around me like satellites, each lost in their own orbit. Dad walked at my side, his hands jammed deep in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the night. Mom and Emily followed behind, their voices low, their words indistinct, as if they were treading carefully on new ground. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was carrying everyone else's burdens on my back. The weight I'd grown so accustomed to had finally lifted, leaving exhaustion in its place, an exhaustion that went deeper than just the events of the evening. Speaking up, letting my truth be heard, had drained me in ways I hadn't expected. It was a strange combination. I felt vindicated, almost lighter, but also hollowed out, wondering what would come next. Would my family remember what was said, or would this all fade into another brief spark of honesty, extinguished by old habits? Back at the hotel, Dad gestured for me to join him out on the balcony. The view was breathtaking, moonlight glittering across the restless ocean, the sound of the surf both soothing and relentless. But my thoughts were tangled, pulling me away from the beauty in front of me. "Lena," he began, his voice gentler than I was used to. "I owe you an apology." The words caught me off guard. Dad wasn't the type to admit fault, not because he didn't care, but because he preferred to maintain peace, to let storms pass rather than wade into them. Hearing him acknowledge his part felt like stepping onto unfamiliar ground. The rules of our family suddenly changed. "For what it's worth," he continued, "you were right at dinner. We've been unfair to you. I didn't see it before, not really, but I do now. And I'm sorry." The vulnerability in his voice knocked the breath out of me, and I just nodded, swallowing hard against the knot in my throat. "Thanks, Dad," I managed, my voice small but steady. He squeezed my shoulder, the gesture both awkward and sincere. "You've always been the steady one in this family," he said quietly. "We've leaned on you more than we should have. I can't promise we'll fix everything overnight, but I want to try." For a moment I saw him not just as my father but as a man trying to do better, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a new way forward. Later that night, Mom appeared at my door. She hovered uncertainly before coming in and sitting at the edge of my bed, her hands twisting her bracelet. "I wanted to talk to you," she said softly, her gaze dropping to her lap. "About tonight." I stayed quiet, giving her space to find the words she needed. "Your dad's right," she said after a long pause. "We haven't been fair to you." I think deep down I always knew it, but it was easier not to look too closely. Especially with Emily. She has a way of making everything seem urgent, and I let that distract me. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "She's always been good at that." Mom smiled a little sadly, but didn't try to argue or minimize it. "I just want you to know I see you, Lena. I see everything you've done for us, all the times you put yourself last so things would run smoothly. I'm sorry if it ever felt like we didn't appreciate you. That was never my intention." Her words, overdue as they were, settled something deep inside me that I hadn't realized was still raw. I nodded, my voice steady even though I felt vulnerable. "Thanks, Mom." The next morning, Emily was unusually quiet. At breakfast, she kept her eyes glued to her plate, barely touching her food. It was as if she was afraid to say the wrong thing or maybe just afraid to say anything at all. As we packed up later, she found me in the hallway, arms crossed protectively over her chest. "Hey," she said, her voice small and uncertain. "About last night. I know I screwed up and I'm sorry. I shouldn't have blamed you for everything." I studied her face, searching for the defensiveness that usually lurked there, but all I saw was fatigue and maybe a touch of embarrassment. "It's not just about last night," I told her, my tone gentle but firm. "It's a pattern, Emily. This keeps happening, and I can't let it keep going like this." She nodded, not meeting my eyes, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I get it. I'll try to do better." It wasn't the sweeping, transformative apology I'd imagined, but it was something, a small step in a different direction. For now that was enough. The weeks that followed felt altered, though not in any dramatic, cinematic way. The changes were subtle, almost tentative, like everyone was testing new boundaries. Emily started texting me out of the blue. A funny meme here, an update about her day there, as though she was feeling her way toward a different kind of relationship. My parents called more often, and when I talked about work or my own life, they actually listened, asking questions and offering support rather than just venting their worries. We slipped up sometimes. Old habits die hard, but I could sense a new awareness, a willingness to meet me halfway instead of letting me shoulder everything on my own. But the biggest shift wasn't in them. 'Twas in me. Speaking up at that dinner had terrified me, but it had also set something free inside me, a part of myself that had been waiting for permission to take up space, to demand to be seen and heard. For so long, I'd let my silence give away my power. I'd absorbed blame and frustration just to keep the peace, to avoid conflict. That night I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't do it anymore, no matter how uncomfortable things got. I realized that the only real change I could control was my own willingness to speak my truth, to stop apologizing for needs that were never unreasonable in the first place. And as I moved forward, I felt lighter, more myself than I'd been in years, no longer defined by what I carried for everyone else, but by what I finally chose to lay down. The shift in me became unmistakable once I made a conscious decision to stop taking on responsibilities that weren't mine. I started drawing lines that I'd never dared to before, gently but firmly telling people no when asked to handle things that didn't belong on my plate. At work, instead of letting my ideas fade into the background or get dismissed, I started asserting myself. When someone talked over me or brushed past my suggestions, I'd circle back and make sure my voice was heard. After years of downplaying my own achievements, I finally let myself be proud, sometimes pausing to actually savor those moments of success. I made it a point to acknowledge my contributions, like when a coworker tried to take credit for a project I had spearheaded. Instead of letting it slide, I spoke up, ensuring everyone knew it was my work. It might have seemed insignificant, but those little acts of self-advocacy started to build on each other. Over time, those small steps became a pattern. My boss started to notice. My team began to treat me differently, with more respect, more inclusion. Eventually, even I couldn't ignore the change. I started to see myself through new eyes. Through it all, Lisa was there as my unwavering supporter. She was the friend who celebrated every milestone, no matter how minor, and always encouraged me to keep growing. One afternoon, during lunch at our favorite spot, she raised her glass of iced tea high, like we were commemorating something monumental. "To the new Lena," she declared, her eyes sparkling. "A badass who doesn't take anyone's crap." I burst out laughing, my nerves dissolving in the warmth of her praise. "I don't know about badass," I protested playfully, "but I'm working on it." She just grinned, shaking her head with certainty. "No, you're already there. And honestly, it suits you." Her words lingered with me for days, reminding me that sometimes the people who know us best can see our growth long before we recognize it in ourselves. At home, the transformation wasn't a miracle cure. My relationship with my family didn't suddenly become perfect. But there was movement, shifts so subtle I might have missed them if I hadn't been paying attention. Emily and I didn't morph into best friends overnight, but our conversations grew a little easier, the silences less awkward. The tension that used to hum beneath the surface started to fade, replaced by a cautious openness. My mom still slipped into old habits, like recruiting me to coordinate another family event. This time, though, I set a gentle but clear boundary. "I'm happy to help, but I can't take the lead. Let Emily handle it this time." She paused, considering, but then nodded in agreement. "Fair enough." The relief I felt was almost immediate, a release of pressure I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. For the first time, I understood how much of my exhaustion had come from trying to hold everything, and everyone, together. One quiet evening, I found myself sitting out on my balcony, watching the sky fade from gold to deep blue. I let my mind wander over the journey that had brought me to this moment. That younger version of myself, the one who swallowed her opinions and let others dictate her path, felt like someone I used to know, not someone I still was. I realized how much I had changed. Now I spoke up, I carved out space for myself, and I honored my own needs and worth. The most profound realization, though, was that I no longer needed validation from anyone. Not Emily, not my parents, not my colleagues, to know that I deserved respect. For the first time in what felt like forever, I experienced a sense of peace that ran deeper than any external approval. The world around me hadn't magically transformed, but I had. And that made all the difference. If you connected with this story, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories like this, and ensures you won't miss out on future content. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you next time.